stagecoach wheels creaked as they slowed to a stop, dust trailing behind like smoke from a dying fire. The town of Dustwell lay quiet beneath a pale winter sky, buildings hunched together as if bracing against the wind. She stepped down carefully, one boot, then the other, her skirts rustling, her gloved hands shaking though she kept her chin high. Josephine's coat was trimmed with fur gone slightly bald at the elbows. A hat too small for her round face sat neatly pinned in place. She had pressed her dress 3 times the night before. Still, when her foot touched the frozen ground, she felt the weight of eyes on her like judgment carried on the wind. The man who'd sent for her, Clint Marrow, was nowhere to be seen. She waited by the post office door, clutching the letter that bore his name. Her fingers trembled as hours passed. A boy came by, stared at her, then snickered. An older woman murmured something sharp and soft to her friend. The words didn't reach her ears, but Josephine had known that tone since childhood. It was the sound of dismissal wearing a smile. By dusk, the town lanterns flickered on, casting long shadows across the boardwalks. She stood alone, coat buttoned to her throat, too proud to ask. The stagecoach had left hours ago. The letter in her palm might as well have been ash. Finally, the general store owner, wiry man with dry hands and tired eyes, stepped out, swept the porch, and looked at her. "You waiting on someone?" Miss C nodded once. "I believe I was sent for, but I think perhaps he's changed his mind." He squinted. Clint Morrow. Her lips pressed tight. "Yes," he hesitated, then scratched his head. "Well, far as I know, Clint left town last week. Went off to Dead Horse Crossing, didn't say nothing about no bride." Josephine swallowed. The letter crumpled slightly in her hand. The wind carried a sharp scent of coal and distant hay. The world tilted, not violently, just enough to let her know she was entirely, unmistakably alone. But she did not weep. She lifted her bag, turned down the nearest street, and walked. Past the bakery with its shuttered windows, past the church bell that would not ring for her. Each step forward wasn't brave. It was survival. The boarding house sat at the edge of Dustwell like a forgotten thought. 1 story, 4 rooms, and a crooked fence that rattled in the wind. Josephine rented the smallest chamber for what little she had: a day's food, a thin mattress, and a square window that overlooked nothing but snow-bitten prairie. No one welcomed her. The landlady, Mrs. Graff, muttered when she walked in, eyebrows lifted at Josephine's size, her breath catching when she read her name aloud. "Mail order bride gone wrong, is it?" she said under her breath, not cruelly, but like a woman stating facts she believed the world already knew. Josephine didn't answer. She simply placed her coin on the counter, took the room key, and climbed the stairs. Inside, she did not light the lamp. She sat on the edge of the bed, skirts rustling in the stillness, hands folded in her lap. Her fingers ached, not from cold but from holding herself together too tightly. She did not cry, not yet. Instead, she unpacked carefully. A folded shawl, a worn copy of Wuthering Heights, a tin of buttons and thread, and at the bottom, beneath soft wrapping paper, a jar of cherry preserves she'd made in July, meant for the man who never came. She set it gently on the windowsill, its ruby light catching the last rays of dusk, a small, stubborn hope placed where it could be seen. The next morning she woke to the sound of boots in the hall and the murmur of other tenants stirring. She dressed plainly: gray wool skirt, patched blouse, worn gloves. A woman like her could not afford pride. Outside, Dustwell blinked beneath a low sun. She walked through it like a ghost, past the blacksmith, where laughter rose like smoke, past the mercantile, where she caught her reflection in the wind-around face, resolute and invisible. She asked no one for help. By noon she had earned a job washing linens at the livery, 3 cents per load. Her hands turned red from the lie. Her back ached from bending. Still, she stayed silent as the stable boys watched her with narrowed eyes and whispered behind sacks of grain. She worked until her bones throbbed, then walked back to her room with the wind at her heels. And that night, alone in her bed, she finally let one tear slip down her cheek. Just one. It was not weakness, it was released by the second week. Josephine had learned the rhythms of Dustwell. The bakery opened before dawn, and the blacksmith sang when he worked. Children skittered through the alleyways after school like windblown paper. The town breathed in predictable patterns except when she passed. Then conversation slowed, eyes flicked, smiles grew tight around the edges. She didn't push back. Instead, she began again, quietly. Her sewing hands were still steady, her stitches tight. She offered to mend aprons for the preacher's wife, hemmed the trousers of a livery boy too poor to buy new. She baked honey biscuits and wrapped them in waxed paper with no name on the tag, left them at doorsteps. No one thanked her, but they never went unaided. Each act was a whisper into a town that did not wish to hear her, but she kept whispering. By early spring she was earning enough to eat warm bread at dusk. She still washed linens when needed, but now spent hours in her small room stitching seams and threading buttons with care. Her fingers grew calloused, her eyes often red, but something in her posture changed. Shoulders not quite so hunched, breath not quite so shallow. Once, in the general store, a young woman reached past her and muttered under her breath, "You'd think she'd go back where she came from." Josephine did not flinch. She simply handed her coins to the store clerk, turned, and left. Outside, the wind lifted the edge of her shawl. She paused for a moment, tucking it back down with a gentle, practiced touch. Her fingers brushed the embroidery she'd added the night before, small flowers stitched in blue thread. Invisible to all but her, the world saw her as too big, too strange, too unwanted, but her thread said otherwise, and so did the man who watched her leave the store that day. He did not speak. He merely adjusted a sack of feet on his shoulder, his gaze lingering for a second longer than most. Not with pity, not with ridicule, but with something quieter, steadier. She didn't notice. Not yet. Instead, she walked back to her room with her bread, her needles, and the cherry preserves, still waiting on the WINDOWSILL. Outside. Spring hadn't quite come, but something in the wind had begun to soften. The bell above the general store door gave a soft jingle, like wind chimes too tired to sing. Josephine stepped inside with her usual caution, her basket light, her list shorter still. Flour, salt, and if she could spare it, a small tin of cinnamon. She didn't look around. She never lingered. But someone new was behind the counter. He wasn't handsome, not in the town's polished sense. Broad in the shoulders, with weathered skin and sleeves rolled to the elbows. His hands were large, the kind that knew hammers, fences, and the weight of silence. His name stitched crookedly onto his apron, read, Cal. She didn't look him in. The eye just set her flour on the counter and reached for her coin purse. He didn't move right away. Storm coming in tonight, he said, voice low, like a man who never hurried his words. She paused. So I've heard, she replied, voice careful, neutral. He rang up her things without a fuss, then added something else quietly, deliberately. A small paper-wrapped bundle. She blinked. I didn't ask for it, just cinnamon, he said. Extra was on the house. Some spilled in the barrel yesterday. Can't sell it proper. His tone made it easy to believe. Still, something in the way he looked at her, not through her, but at her, and settled her balance. She nodded, murmured thanks, and left. But the next week she came again, and he was there. This time he asked if she baked. She said she used to. He nodded, didn't press. A week after that, he asked if she'd ever tried the winter apples from Carpenter's orchard. Said they kept longer than most. She said no, but she might, and again he didn't press. No compliments, no pity, just the exchange of words like seeds quietly planted one day. She noticed he folded her paper bags a little straighter than others. Another day, he slipped a single button into her parcel, a smooth, carved wooden one. She didn't mention it, but she kept it. Josephine never lingered in the store, but she started choosing odd times to shop closer to closing, when he was likely to be alone. And when he'd hand her change, his fingers would brush hers. Not long, just enough. Enough to make her wonder. Enough to let her know someone at last had seen her. Spring took its time. The snow didn't melt so much as retreat, one brittle patch at a time. The ground turned to mud, then thawed enough to smell like earth again. Josephine's hands, chapped from winter's labor, began stitching lighter fabrics, cotton dresses for town girls, curtains for the schoolhouse. She delivered each one quietly, never waiting for thanks. But she stopped by the general store every Thursday, always near dusk. Cal never mentioned it. He merely kept the door unlatched. Even on windy days, their conversations never strayed far. Prices, whether what the preacher's boy broke this time, but there was comfort in it. Not forced, not hungry. Safe. Once, she left behind her gloves on the counter. When she returned the next morning, he didn't ask why she'd come back. He simply handed them over, already warm from his pocket. They fit you, he said. They're mine, she replied, though her voice softened. Another day she brought him 3 fresh eggs wrapped in linen. Too many from the hens. I'm watching, she lied. He didn't argue, just nodded and tucked them away like something sacred. Still, they never spoke of anything real, not her past, not why she came, not what the town said behind her back. And for that she was grateful. She began noticing things about him: how he always smelled faintly of cedar and flour, how he counted change in his head before the register even clicked, how he never raised his voice, even when the McKinley twins knocked over a barrel of oats. Once she caught herself smiling as she hemmed a new shawl, choosing thread the same shade as his apron. That frightened her a little. In Dustwell, affection had always come at a cost. A dare, a joke, a bet to be won. But Cal asked for nothing. He simply was, and that quiet, his stillness, was something she hadn't realized she'd been starving for. So, when he handed her a parcel one evening with her usual flour and said, I set aside the good cloth. Thought you might want it. She didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. Then, thank you. He nodded once, didn't say more. The cloth was soft muslin, pale sky blue, far too fine for mending. That she touched it for a long time that night, alone in her room, and for the first time in months, she let herself imagine making something beautiful again. It was a Saturday when she brought it in. The tart was modest, no lattice top, no sugared glaze, just a thick golden crust and a filling of stewed apples and cinnamon. She had baked it slowly, using the very spice he'd once slipped into her bag. The apples were from the bottom of the crate, bruised in places, but she'd trimmed them carefully. It wasn't a romantic gesture, she told herself. Just a kindness, a returning of balance. Still, her hands trembled as she stepped into the general store. Cal was restocking salt licks, sleeves rolled up, forearms dusted in white. He looked up when she entered, saw the wrapped parcel in her hands. She placed it gently on the counter. "I had extra," she said. He didn't reach for it immediately. Just looked at her with that quiet steadiness she had come to expect. "Apple?" he asked. She nodded. "Not too sweet." He unfolded the cloth slowly, like something fragile rested inside. The scent rose between them, warm fruit, cinnamon, and brown butter. His gaze dropped to the tart, then lifted again. "Looks like it belongs on a holiday table," he murmured. She shrugged. "Only had enough for one." He took a breath. Not deep, not showy, just enough to mark the moment. Then he said, "I'll eat it after supper. Thank you." No flourish, no awkward flattery, but something settled in his eyes, something soft, like dawn on a still lake. She nodded, turned to go, darted the door. He called after her, "Josephine." She stopped. No one in town ever said her name like that. Not clipped, not whispered, just spoken like a truth. She turned. He held up a jar. "I ordered in preserves last week. Cherry." A pause. "Thought maybe you'd want some. Yours is probably near gone." She blinked. "Mine." He smiled, just barely. "The one you keep in the window. Been walking past it all winter." Her breath caught. He had seen it. She stepped forward, took the jar with both hands. Their fingers didn't touch. They didn't need to. Outside, the wind was warmer. The sky was beginning to stretch into spring, and for the first time, she did not feel ashamed of wanting to be seen. The spring social was held behind the Dustwell church, where yellow bells bloomed stubbornly along the fence line, and the women laid out pies like offerings. A fiddler played near the garden gate, bow flying over strings like wind through grass. The men clustered near barrels of lemonade. The women stood in tight circles, laughter sharp as lemon. Josephine had not planned to go, but that morning, Cal had left a note in her flour bag. Just one sentence, written in careful block letters. "You ought to come. No one brings peach biscuits like you." She almost didn't. Then she pressed her newest shawl, the pale blue one stitched from the cloth he'd given her, and pinned it around her shoulders with trembling hands. She carried a basket of peach biscuits, still warm, and walked the dusty path alone. Whispers followed before she reached the gate. She showed up, alone, of course. "She's got nerve, I'll say that." Josephine kept walking. She placed her biscuits on the table with the others, smoothed her skirt, and turned downly to find Cal standing a few paces behind, sleeves rolled, hair brushed, like he might have tried twice. He offered no smile, just held out his hand. "Dance." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud, but it was everything. She placed her hand in his, fingers cold from nerves. The townsfolk hushed. Some tilted their heads, others stared outright. He led her to the edge of the makeshift circle, where couples swayed to the fiddlers, tuned. He didn't talk, he didn't look at the others, he looked only at her. "You don't have to," she whispered. "I know," he replied, and they began to move. It was not graceful. She was out of practice. He stepped left when she stepped right. Once, they nearly collided, and still he never let go. Around them, the whispers rose again, but Cal just shifted his hand slightly, brought her closer, and Josephine round, ridiculed, rejected. Josephine lifted her chin, and met the world's gaze without blinking. They danced one full song, then another. When the music stopped, Cal didn't drop her hand. He didn't kiss her. He didn't need to, because everyone saw what had already changed. She was not the joke. She was not the charity case. She was the woman a good man had chosen to stand beside in daylight, in public, without shame. And that was enough. The night after the spring social, the town buzzed with talk, but Josephine's room was quiet. Her shawl still held the scent of grass and dust. Her hand still remembered the feel of his. She hadn't spoken much during their dances. Neither had he, but something had passed between them, real and full, like breath. She didn't expect to see him again so soon, but just after sundown. Boots crunched the gravel outside the boarding house. She opened the door before he knocked. Cal stood on the porch, holding a brown paper parcel in one hand and a nervousness she hadn't seen before in the other. "I got to thinking," he said, voice low. "You never tasted my baking." "You bake?" she asked, a smile tugging the corners of her mouth. He shrugged. "Only one thing, but I do it well." He held out the parcel. She unwrapped it slowly. A single cornbread loaf, its top cracked, golden, its scent soft with honey. She looked up at him, thought maybe we'd eat it together. He added. She stepped aside. "The porch is better." They sat on the top step. The night wrapped around them, stars blinked over the prairie, and the air smelled of tilled soil and lilac. She passed him half the loaf. No plates, no ceremony. For a long time, they ate in silence. Then, without looking at her, Cal spoke. "You ever wonder," he said, "what did it feel like if someone saw you clear through without fixing, without pity, just saw you?" Josephine didn't answer right away. She let the words settle. Then, "Every day," he nodded. "Me too." Another silence passed. Not empty, just waiting. Cal turned toward her. His eyes were steadier than his voice. "They said things about you, about the letter, about why you came. I never asked, not because I didn't care, but because I figured it wasn't mine to take from you." She swallowed, heart beating slow but loud. "And still, he added. Every time you walk into that store, something in me gets quieter, better, like you belong there. Like I do too. Her breath hitched. She set down the last bite of cornbread and met his gaze. I thought I came here because someone wanted me, she whispered. But maybe I came here to find out I didn't need to be wanted, only to be seen. The stars blinked again, and in the quiet, with no audience and no shame, he reached for her hand, not rushed, not possessive, just steady. She let him, and beneath that open sky, with only wind for music, she rested her head gently on his shoulder. The days after that night didn't change everything, but they changed enough. Cal began walking her home in the evenings, never asking, never assuming, just appearing with the setting sun and that same steady presence that never made her flinch. He asked her once if she liked the sound of chickens in the morning. She'd smiled. I do. So, he showed her the parcel of land he'd been clearing outside town, 20 acres of stubborn earth and scattered cottonwoods, an old fence in need of mending, a cabin still just timber and outlined. Nothing much to see, but she saw it dot the slope where the sun would rise, the corner patch where herbs might grow, the space near the steps where she could one day hang her wash or leave cooling pies. They didn't speak of marriage, not yet, but they built. Each weekend he brought her to the land, and they worked shoulder to shoulder, he driving posts, she planting starters in the soft thawed dirt. Her hands knew how to coax things into blooming. His hands knew how to build things that lasted. One morning, she arrived to find a small bench by the cottonwood tree. For resting, he said, handing her coffee, or watching she sat. He sat beside her. The silence between them no longer carried questions. It carried comfort. In town, the whispers faded, or perhaps they simply stopped caring. When Josephine passed now, head still turned, but not with mockery. More often, with something closer to thoughtfulness. The children waved, a few women nodded, one even asked her how she got her biscuits so soft. Cal fixed the porch steps at her boarding house. Though she'd never asked, she mended his shirts before he realized they were torn. She no longer measured her days in loneliness. She measured them in rows planted, in cloths folded, in moments beside him that said more than any vow ever could. One evening, as they packed up tools near the cabin tubby, Cal pulled something from his pocket. Not a ring, a key. I'll be done with the frame by June, he said, voice rough from dust and quiet nerves. If you want it, it could be yours too. Josephine looked at the key resting in his palm. She didn't weep. She didn't speak. She simply placed her hand over his hand, held it there, her fingers firm and warm. Yes, their cabin was finished by the second week of June. Not grand, just 2 rooms, a porch wide enough for a rocking chair, and shutters she helped paint in a soft cornflower blue. The garden bloomed in uneven rows. Strawberries tangled near the steps. The chickens clucked like they'd always been there. Josephine moved in on a Monday. There was no wedding dress, no preacher, just a quiet agreement over coffee and the turning of a key in the front door. Cal built a bench beneath the cottonwood and carved their initials, small, neat, private. In Dustwell, people noticed. But this time there were no jokes, no pointed laughter, only passing smiles, soft and uncertain, like people remembering their own beginnings. Mrs. Graft, the landlady, sent over a pie. Cal added shelves to the kitchen, sturdy ones, just the right height for her preserves, and Josephine, in turn, hung her shawl on a peg by the door, like she meant to stay. They spent the first evening on the porch, side by side, watching the prairie breathe beneath a sky slowly settling into dusk. She was mending a tea towel. He was oiling a hinge. No fireworks, no declarations, just the sound of 2 lives finding rhythm. She looked over at him, thread in her lap, and said, I used to think I'd have to change who I was to be loved. Cal didn't look up. You didn't, she nodded. I know that now. Then, quieter, you reminded me who I already was. He set the hinge down, and after a long pause he said, I just saw what was always there. You did the rest. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Later that night, she placed the old jar of cherry preserves, the one she'd brought with her all those months ago, on their new table. They opened it together. The taste was a little faded, but still sweet, still real. Like her. She had been mocked, rejected, measured by others, and found wanting. But now, in this quiet house on this stubborn land, she wasn't someone's joke. She was someone's partner, someone's peace. And as the wind moved gently through the open windows, Josephine closed her eyes and rested her head on Cal's shoulder. She had survived the world's cruelty with her dignity intact. And in the end, she had not only found love, she had built it.